to push the button and hit record, and that way we'll be able to share it more widely. So just to remind everybody, we want these sessions to be interactive, despite me just asking you to turn your microphones off. I really encourage everyone to switch on their cameras so we can see your lovely faces, and to get involved by posting comments and questions in the chat. The chat is always usually quite lively, so let's keep the energy flowing in the chat, even if we can't necessarily interject at moments that we may want to. So just to put things into a little bit of perspective, now since the 24-hour London team was established at City Hall back at the end of 2016, we have stressed the importance of proactive planning for London at night. And how do we do this? We do this through the development of holistic nighttime strategies. And a strategic and partnership approach is absolutely critical to this. And we want to ensure that London is planned for, designed for, programmed for, and managed as carefully at night as it is during the daytime. And this is not least because nighttime is often when inequalities are most starkly felt. And it's almost 2 years now since we published our nighttime strategy guidance. Now, this was to help local authorities and their partners plan for a safer, more diverse and resilient London at night. And since then, my team and our colleagues at Publica and Didobe have been providing this one-to-one support for local authorities to develop your nighttime strategies. And just to reiterate, they're always on hand to offer advice, ideas, and support. Do you want to give us a little wave, everyone who's here? I really encourage you to take advantage of the support on offer. It's funded by the GLA. As people who work in local authorities and with local authorities, you will probably know, you don't need me to tell you that resources are not infinite. And so if you are in any way thinking, not sure if this is the right time, I can assure you now is the right time. And I would really encourage you to take advantage of that one-to-one support, because we are not sure how much longer we'll be able to provide for it. We also run regular events and we publish a monthly newsletter. So if you haven't already signed up to that, then please just drop your details into the chat. We'll add you to the mailing list. You can be part of our merry band of people who are dedicated to making London better at night. Now, today we're going to be hearing from teams that we've been absolutely delighted to help support in developing their own nighttime strategies. 3 very different places, different approaches, lots of exciting stuff to discover and talk about. We're going to hear from the team who developed Greenwich Town Centre's nighttime strategy. Then we're going to hear from the team from Camden Council to share the work they've been doing to gather their nighttime strategy evidence base. And then finally, the Heart of London Business Alliance will give us an overview of the nighttime strategy that they've developed for their business improvement district. And this encompasses some of Central London's most famous nighttime landmarks. So hugely interesting from that perspective as well. But before we dive into those strategies, let's have a very quick recap on the nighttime strategy guidance that is available online to help you get started. So I am going to now turn over to my lovely colleagues at Publica to guide us through.
Yes, hello, hi everyone. Can I just confirm or check that my slides are sharing? My screen is.
They are. Daniel, introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are if they don't already.
So I'm Daniel. I'm a researcher at Publica. Here with my colleague Setu. And in 2021, we, with the GLA 24-hour team, published the nighttime policy guidance for boroughs. And nighttime strategy guidance for boroughs. Apologies. And so we published a sort of detailed step-by-step guide for developing a nighttime strategy. And this sets out 5 main steps. So starting with project inception, really bringing together a team from across council departments to do things like mapping stakeholders, reviewing existing policy, and establishing a really high-level timeline, really at the start of the project. We're then really keen to emphasise the importance of establishing a baseline. And so that can act as a sort of marker in the sand, so that when you've developed your strategy and start to implement some of the actions, you have that baseline against which you can measure impacts. And so to do this, we suggest setting up nighttime stakeholder forums, engaging with those stakeholders, but then also more broadly researching your nighttime economy across your borough, and thinking of that spatially and how that's mapped across different town centres, and then also temporally how that economy changes over the 24-hour period. And that can include a range of surveys, lots of use of data, mapping night workers' travel patterns at night. There's lots of suggested data sources for developing that evidence base. And then it's also key to publish that, to have that as a kind of integral part of the strategy as well. So again, something that is a resource for other departments as well, and something that you can refer back to see where you've come from as you develop your strategy. The next stage is then to develop a vision and a set of objectives, and again, really key to sort of publish that, and also publish the consultation and the evidence that goes into informing that vision. And then that will lead on to the strategy and a set of actions. And really, this is the nighttime strategy, and we're going to see a number of examples of these today. But this is really the moment to sort of publish what you're doing and why, and to start working with partners and stakeholders to develop those actions. And then a really kind of key final part of the process is the yearly tracking, the tracking of that action plan. So ideally, there will have been a set of key performance indicators or metrics set in that action plan. And then the idea is that ideally you'd be reporting on that every year, and referring back to the evidence base again to sort of track impacts. So we've got several sort of diagrams showcasing that process. I think this diagram highlights the sort of publications that we imagine would come out of a nighttime strategy, and really the ways in which there are, across the development of the strategy, there are various points in which people can feed into the strategy. So in the evidence base, it's really about gathering as much input as possible from as many stakeholders as you can. And then the vision is that moment of sort of publishing a vision externally and sharing that, and then getting more sort of feedback on the vision itself, which then feeds into the strategy and action plan. And then the annual report is this sort of much more ideally sort of objective measure of sort of reporting on what the strategy has achieved. I think it's worth reiterating that when we talk about nighttime strategies, we're thinking really holistically. And so it covers everything from public realm and lighting and the environment at night, to the sort of the economy after 6 p.m. and everything that goes around business development and business support for nighttime businesses. And then there's everything around the sort of the community and culture at night, the governance of nighttime spaces, how you manage spaces, and everything from sort of waste collection and that side of sort of nighttime activity to the sort of the stewardship of public spaces at night. And so we were really encouraging a sort of really wide range of actions to be included in a nighttime strategy. And so one of the sort of parts of the guidance document is a set of sort of example actions that a nighttime strategy can take. And again, it's anything from setting up regular nighttime forums and really setting that governance for spaces at night, to things like the night test, so establishing what we're calling a nighttime lens on all policy and council decisions. So asking the question, what is the impact of this policy in other council departments and work? What's the impact of a policy on a space at night? And yeah, that a nighttime strategy ideally could also be used to support licensing processes and policies, and wider sort of planning policies as well. So really, we'd encourage you to go to the guidance and take a look at some of these example actions and think about which ones might be most relevant to your boroughs. It's also worth noting that the document sort of makes the case for nighttime strategy as well. So the need for kind of proactive and holistic planning, but also the ability to sort of to plan for long-term changes and how those would impact your nighttime businesses and your borough at night. But then also a strategy can be used as a really powerful advocacy tool and bring sort of visibility to your borough at night. And it's a way of working really closely with businesses and building consensus and really trying to work through some quite complex issues and some potential conflicts in places at night. So I think we found that that's one of the kind of most valuable aspects of a nighttime strategy, is really bringing as many people as possible to the table to talk about issues that they might face at night. And then finally, just to end on some of the other resources that are available. So alongside the strategy guidance document, we have a really comprehensive set of international examples of best practice, case studies, precedents, really projects to get you thinking about what that might look like in your borough and to really inspire you. And as Amy says, we're always open to, if anyone in the room is developing a nighttime strategy or just wants a few ideas for a particular program, we're really happy to jump on a call and share some of these examples and share examples of what other boroughs are doing and what's working well. In the 2 years since we published this document, we've probably doubled the number of sort of case studies, particularly London-based case studies, that we can share with you, and we'd be really happy to do that. So I'll stop sharing, but thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's really exciting. And just to say, we'd encourage you to share this information as well with your colleagues and anyone else you might think would be interested. So, the more we can kind of spread this around and encourage participation, the better London will become at night. I'm now going to ask our guest speakers to give a quick 5-minute introduction to their respective nighttime strategies, and they'll tell us what stage they're at, what area it covers, and we're then going to pose 3 questions and ask each team in turn to answer them. So Daniel or Satu, I think you're going to paste the 3 questions in the chat so everybody knows the topics we're going to be covering: evidence-based gathering, creating a nighttime vision, and producing an action plan. And we'll also open these questions up to the floor, as we know there are quite a few among you who are developing strategies and will have valuable insights to contribute. So if something really rings true with what you're doing and you'd like to share it, please do let us know. So our first stop today is the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and I'd like to invite the team there to tell us about their strategy for Greenwich Town Centre. So we have Judy, Mary Helen, and Sue.
Oh, good morning. Thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. Michelle Rankin, our Assistant Director of Business and Skills, so wanted to be here, but she's also on the board of Digital Connect Greenwich, and they have a large launch event today. But we do also have, luckily, our new head of business, Tom, and he's here today as well. And so I think between us, we'll be able to both acknowledge the high level of support we've had from the GLA and partners and Visit Greenwich and businesses and residents, but also attempt to ask some of the practical questions. We have developed a nighttime strategy, Making Our Heritage Shine, which is available very soon. It's in I think it's its final just before sign-off version, so it'll be available in a couple of weeks, and we can send the link through. And we've been on this journey, which Mary Helen will explain to you clearly through a short amount of slides. But it's just to tell you that we also joined in our High Streets for All. We're lucky enough to get High Streets for All to help us further our strategy action plan. So although it's about to be published, we've been using it to work on, and we've been implementing the action plan, and we can give you some examples later. In doing this, in using High Streets for All, we've tested our approaches with partners, and as an example, Greenwich Cooperative Development Agency has been supporting market traders and other retailers and works closely now with Visit Greenwich. So there are new connections and networks springing up to support the approach that Amy described in the beginning, the strategic, involving everyone, going forward together, building a consensus. And it is a challenge to make sure that a nighttime centre works well, and also that it's inclusive of everyone, and that one use doesn't take over from and therefore exclude another group. So it's a big challenge, but you get a lot of help from the GLA and others, so it's definitely worthwhile. Our new inclusive economy strategy is being developed in Greenwich, and that is our principle moving forward: community wealth building, inclusive growth. And so this approach in this strategy is also about inclusion, and that policy direction is also there from the GLA, that you are endeavouring to ensure that your plans are inclusive. We want to support the growth of the nighttime economy in the town centre. Our town centre is considered the beating heart of our community, and a thriving nighttime economy is essential to its health and resilience and vibrancy. Yes, not just the daytime, just as well curated for the night. Our plan for the evening economy is also addressed in our overarching new strategy as a council called Our Greenwich. I'll put the link into the chat. We did a lot of consultation, and for example, one of the missions of Our Greenwich is to make sure our high streets and town centres are vibrant and prosperous, and a booming nightlife will be part of that. So I'll put that link in a little bit. I would like to hand over to Mary Helen now, so that she can explain more clearly exactly how we developed the strategy and where we are in that journey. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Judy. I'll try to be brief. I know we've got a short amount of time for this first question. Thanks to Amy Lame and the team, of course, for inviting us. We're really happy to be here and to share our experience. My name is Mary Helen Young. I'm managing consultant at 4th Street. We're placemaking consultants specializing in culture, heritage, leisure, and urban visioning. We've been fortunate enough to work in Greenwich over the past 15 years or more with many different partners across the site, the World Heritage Site, Old Royal Naval College, and more recently quite closely with the council. So the development of this strategy came out of our recent collaboration around the High Streets for All bid, which was fortunate to have that sort of groundwork laid out. You can see a very sneak preview of the strategy on the right here, but as Judy says, that's going to be officially published shortly. And just to say, the stages of work were many in a 4-month period to pull this together, and I'll talk a little bit more about those throughout this presentation. The main issue in developing this strategy is it's a World Heritage Site, Greenwich Town Centre, ranking in the top 10 national destinations. It's a place for festivals and visitors and often tourists, but locals have felt left out of that approach. So we were given the brief to think more about what's the local offer, how can the place visit for local visits. We did extensive consultation externally with cultural and community partners, and then what was really impactful is our consultation exercise across the council itself, across policies and departments, bringing together all of these departments that you see here and really giving that nuanced strategy. And we will also talk about that a little bit more later. And finally, the geography. Of course, you could quite narrowly define Greenwich Town Centre, as you can see on the left. But if we think about the partners that are actually involved in creating programs for spaces, getting residents involved, these kinds of things, then it's much wider. So that's kind of pulling in that network and that web. And then, of course, it was brought up many times, the proximity to Deptford, and we thought a lot about what's the difference between that nighttime offer in Deptford and the nighttime offer in Greenwich Town Centre as well. I'll stop there because I think we might have overrun slightly.
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating, and great to see how Greenwich has brought together that kind of mix of tourists and local residents. So is that the end of your presentation? Just checking that Tom didn't want to say anything. Just want to make sure that everybody has had a chance to speak. Is that right, Mary Helen?
I believe so.
I just
Okay.
wanted to add that obviously we also benefited from a night surgery during this time, where Amy and the team came down and discussed issues with members, the leader and members, and also partners. So that was really helpful as well to the process.
Yeah, it was hugely valuable for our team as well to be on the ground and seeing what your exciting plans are. So thank you, Greenwich. We're going to come back to you with those questions in a little bit, but we're going to head over the river to my home borough of Camden, where the local authority is in the process of gathering the evidence base that will inform their co-created strategy. So I'm going to turn you over now to Victoria and Patrick.
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Victoria Giddens. I'm an Inclusive Economy Project Officer at Camden Council, and I'm here with my manager, Patrick Jones, who will cover some of the questions slightly later on in the session. Thanks, Daniel. Do you want to just skip to the next slide, or whoever's driving this, please? Thank you. Camden's evening and nighttime strategy. So this is our first one, which I think it's the first for most on the call. So what we've done so far is take quite a sort of a borough-wide approach to doing our initial engagement and gathering data about people's lived experience and what's happening in Camden at night. The arrow there is pointing to what stage are we at right now, which is right smack bang in the middle of a 3-day citizens' assembly process. We had the first one last Saturday all day, and then we've got our next one this coming Saturday, and the final one the 4th of March. So we're kind of right in the middle of that big engagement piece with our residents. But what we've been doing up until now has been what you can see there at the top of the slide, with a range of engagement methodologies, including some face-to-face workshops in Camden Town, a couple in the Seven Dials area, and we also did a workshop in Kilburn with colleagues from Brent. Alongside that, we've held a range of stakeholder conversations with key groups across the boroughs. So speaking to businesses, bids, and particular kind of representative and advocacy groups, including Camden Disability Action, Age UK Camden. We've gone along to youth clubs. We spoke to our youth MPs here at Camden. So really trying to make sure that we had the opportunity for people to come along just from the general public, while also making sure that we sort out those voices who wouldn't necessarily readily come to a workshop like that. So trying to make sure we kind of were proactive in how we spoke to our communities. And then alongside that, we've also used a commonplace website, which I'm sure will be familiar to many of you on the call, or the platform itself. And we had a few different surveys on there just to gauge the views of residents specifically, and our businesses, as well as workers, and we also had those surveys in easy read format for people who wanted to access the information a little bit differently. So we've thought a lot about how we can make this process as accessible as possible for our residents and the needs that they have. As I mentioned, we're now at the Citizens Assembly process, which we're working with Involve. They're deliberative democracy engagement experts. So we've got them as our independent facilitators who have helped us do the design for the assembly, and they're also then doing the facilitation of it as well. And we've used a civic lottery style process to recruit 50 people who are a mix of residents, business owners and workers to be our participants for the assembly. So that was quite important because we didn't handpick people for the assembly. As I'm sure it would be no surprise to anyone on the call, it's obviously a highly contentious issue as well for many people, and we made sure that we used a process that was as fair and transparent as possible, and tried to stay away from any subjective decision making about who was in the room or who is in the room for the assembly. So and then, what we get from this assembly and the things that they recommend will be used by the council to draft our strategy, and we'll provide for further engagement before we move to actually launching it. So, this kind of overall engagement approach and the actual development of it sort of all tied tie quite closely together, and this is consistent with the way that Camden has done other big pieces of strategy and policy before, including for climate change and adult social care as well. So we've really focused on first doing the kind of lived experience perspectives, and really wanting to build some awareness and consensus among the community, but also businesses and anchors across the borough to kind of build some consensus around what we want to do together moving forward. So yeah, to the next slide, please. Yeah, so oh yeah, cool. Thank you. So in terms of who's developing this, as mentioned, we're doing this a lot with our communities, and that engagement process has obviously we've spoken to a range of different businesses and other stakeholders. Just to quickly mention, we also set up an expert advisory group who have basically been running alongside us as part of this whole design and engagement piece. And they've been there as a sounding board and really to kind of throw some challenges back to us as a council to say, how are we going with the thinking and the presentation of materials that we're providing for the assembly. And I've put the names up there. We aim to get as wide a mix of people as possible with that group. We know there are still, you might sort of spot that there's probably some gaps there in terms of representation, but that was sort of our best effort with knowing that people are also quite busy. So we've aimed as much as possible to hold ourselves to a level of transparency and accountability, and recognizing that we certainly don't have all the answers. And again, this sort of goes to that consensus building part as well. So they've been there as a sounding board, but not as a decision making body as part of our project. Next slide, please. And just to say as well, we also have, we've got some colleagues from UCL who are doing an independent evaluation of all of this as well. So we're trying to make sure we are transparent about how we're doing all of this. It's just certainly something that I think a lot of our residents are expecting as well. So just to explain in terms of what areas will the strategy cover, and I suppose in answering that, we're also answering what our Citizens Assembly is looking at. This slide is actually what we used for the Assembly last week to explain to participants where their contributions and where this Assembly fits into the overall strategy making process. And I guess this sort of goes to the heart of some of the tensions with using this kind of process to develop a strategy, where, how much authority or power are we giving up in how we do this? And I suppose giving up is maybe not the best way of framing that, but where are we sharing and how genuine is that, and does the Assembly have a good sense of that too? So the way we framed it for them was to say, we want you to think about new ways to make Camden's evening and nighttime safe, inclusive, more diverse, and any other objectives or values that you think we should be taking through into this strategy, and identifying the best ways to make these changes happen, and really emphasising that we want them to do a zoomed out view of all of this. This is not about any one piece of the council's responsibilities, or even the responsibilities of other businesses and actors in the evening and nighttime. So we tried to nuance that with the second piece there around, it obviously touches on things that relate to planning and licensing, but those have their own processes for change. We want you to think about how they all fit together. So, and the outer scope stuff is fairly straightforward. So that landed, I think, okay with everybody, but people are keen to see that we actually use what they tell us from the Assembly.
I'm sure we'll go into this a bit more.
Yeah,
as
we
well
will.
When you answer the question. When we go into the question. So.
And just one final slide. Thank you. Just to the next slide. In terms of what the Assembly is looking at and what our strategy is going to be structured around, is a vision for Camden's evening and nighttime, and one that speaks to Camden as a borough. But we also know that, and people have told us they want to make sure that this vision accounts for the kind of the local characteristics across Camden. There's obviously some really varied. There's Camden Town, but then you've got quieter places where it's where you've got more of a high street vibe. So that's kind of one piece from here. The next piece is a suite of principles to provide more details around what's important about how we deliver on the vision, and we're working through that with our participants this coming Saturday. And then finally, the actual actions themselves. what should we do to deliver on these, and how should we do that? Not just the council, but how should we do that across our partners and anchors, SMEs, the VCS, and the community itself. So yeah, those are the three kind of key elements that we're working towards with the Assembly. Yeah, look forward to hearing more from others on the call. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, Victoria. And as a Camden resident, I was very excited when I got the invitation through to put my name forward for the Citizens Assembly. I was very tempted, but I didn't do that because, as you say, it's about getting that balanced view and making sure that, everyone's voice is heard. So very exciting to see that. And now we're going to go into the West End. Let's now hear about the nighttime strategy that the Heart of London Business Alliance has developed for part of the West End. And we've got Mark Williams, who's the Director of Destination at Holba, and Anna, who has worked on the strategy. Over to you both.
Can I just check it's sharing successfully?
Yeah, it's
Great.
It's working. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody. So yeah, we're part of London Business Alliance. We're an alliance of 6 business improvement districts, 3 occupier, 3 property owner in the West End. So our area stretches from Green Park Station, if you don't know it, all the way down Piccadilly, bit of Mayfair, bit of St James's, Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus, and that's on the screen there. So give you an idea of where we are in the West End. In terms of kind of why a business improvement district has taken this approach in terms of developing a strategy like this, we're very cognizant of the fact that we're custodians of an area that is it's of national significance in terms of its evening nighttime economy. There's some really integral buildings and venues within our district, and at the heart of a 24-hour city. So we felt the delicate ecosystem that is the evening nighttime economy and how that feeds the daytime economy was incredibly important for us to get behind and develop a strategy. We've been working on it. We started it pre-COVID in 2018 with some scoping studies with Publica, and are just finally finishing it off now. So it's been quite a long journey, but end of next month we're unveiling it. It's really it's unlocked some really exciting conversations with Westminster City Council, our local authority, and they've played a really significant part in developing this strategy with us. But it's really to see how we can develop and celebrate that whole 6 till 6 economy. Looking at we're in an area where there's lots of commerce, and where we're communicating at different time zones in different parts of the day. So it's a really important thing for us. But I'll hand over to Anna to talk a bit more about the strategy.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to show you some highlights of where we are, and then we'll come back to answer more questions, the 3 specific questions. So as Mark said, it's an area that's really at the heart of the West End, contains Leicester Square and Piccadilly Circus. The map that you can see shows the red line boundary of the Holba area. And then our evidence base and all the surveying and everything we looked at went beyond that, because it's also a gateway into Soho, to Covent Garden, lots of residential areas around, even though it's at the heart of London. So it was important for us to spread our evidence base wider than the core area itself. So going to the next slide. So, and this is the structure of the strategy. So we started with an evidence base that was a lot of field work and also desk-based research and lots of engagement at that stage. And as Mark said, this has spanned pre and post-COVID. So it's been very interesting speaking to people either side of what's happened. Then we move into the vision and strategy, working really closely with Holba and with lots of stakeholders, which includes a vision statement for how the area will function at night, and exactly as Amy said, that proactive planning, the strategic and holistic, so designing for London, designing public realm and designing the spaces and the policies and the strategies for the future of this place. And then it goes into an action plan. So the action plan actually has 57 actions spread across the key objectives, the strategic objectives that came out from that vision statement, and they can be started by Holba, many of them will be, but they're all working with lots and lots of partners across the area. So I've included this slide to show the project timeline. The diagram is quite complex, but it shows that we started working with Westminster at the very, very beginning, and with steering board set up by Heart of London. There were lots of stakeholder roundtables with operators. This very particular type of really important, in fact, it's a really strategic nighttime economy for London and UK economy here. So we had sector-based roundtable sessions, and we had an international expert panel as well, because London being a world city, we're also working with people from Sydney and from New York and from other cities. We had questionnaires for night workers. There are 11,000 people working at night in the area, and day workers, and it's very interesting seeing. We'll come back to that as well. What came out of those, and then once we developed the objectives, we went back and had expert stakeholder meetings, including with Amy and her team, which was really much appreciated. So our key findings, I'm not going to go into them in much depth, but it's important, this ecosystem, this mix of uses, culture is driving nightlife here and is critically important. So everything that supports that and continues to support that post-COVID is really important. Designing for the public realm at night as you would for the day. There are key business challenges coming out, lots of different things, but pandemic and Brexit and other economic disruption, inclusivity and safety. Safety is a key point here, and decision making, and that comes into licensing, as we've touched on in previous. So the vision, the Horba's vision, is to secure and enhance the Heart of London's position as a world-class 24-hour destination, working collaboratively to make the area welcoming, safe, attractive, exciting, inclusive and diverse for the benefit of all who visit, live and work there. The objectives, one is really recognizing the value, and that's not just financial value, the cultural value of ENT in this area, supporting that collaborative working and the evidence-led decision-making, making it more welcoming and attractive, diversifying to bring in more people with different range of experiences and uses, attracting a world-class workforce, and then leading to innovation, and improving inclusivity and access. So I'm just going to show one page here. This is one page of what the action plan looks like. So leads from those objectives into really a lot of detail, split between the 5 objectives. This is the first one. These are really big actions actually here, which are about thinking about this in policy terms, a special area designation. I've got some others which you can show later as we come back to action plan, but it's showing, I was aiming to show the from where we've gone over all of this time from research and really in-depth research in an area into very, very fine-grained actions, which Horba setting up a whole governance structure to go back to year after year and see how they're doing and can share with others. Thank you. I'll stop sharing there.
Fantastic. Wow. Quite overwhelming and very exciting. Or is it just me? I think there's a lot to learn and share here. So I just really impressed with 3 very different parts of London, but each with local and international significance for nighttime culture and activity. Really excited to see these strategies being implemented. So we're now going to move on and find out a bit more. So this section will be dedicated to those questions. So how it will work is I'll ask the question, and then in turn, each borough will respond, and we'll have time for Q&A. And I would encourage you to, again, use the chat. If you've got questions as you go along, please do put them in the chat. We can pick them up at the end. We'll also have a little bit of time for you to raise your hand and ask any questions. So question 1 is about evidence base. When gathering the evidence base that's informing your strategies, what's been most useful? What's been challenging? And were there any surprises that came up during your research? So you've got 5 minutes each. Go, Greenwich, over to you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, so really useful. Thanks everyone for sharing your experience. It's such a great day to come together around this. On the data question, of course, this is a new area of policy and strategy for Greenwich. So there weren't any really existing coordinated data sets. So we had to do a bit of scrabbling around to piece together from available sources, but we got we had an interesting picture created by these that you can see here. Of course, the nighttime observatory data is really useful. Google mobility data tells you about where and why people are going different places. I'll come on to some of the transport for London usage of stations. That was quite interesting and detailed. We had the council's vacancies audit, as well as the audit of uses across the town centre, so we could see what kind of mix and the kind of the health of the town centre and a brief overview. And then we also had a couple of surveys. We were able to run a resident survey actually when we were developing the High Streets for All bid, which had a lot of relevant questions, which was useful for this as well. But just to dig into a couple of things, this review of evidence brought out a couple of headlines. We saw that day trip visitors, rather than potentially international visitors, people staying overnight, were spending longer in the town centre and spending more. So those people, so possibly Londoners, people from the local region, more aware of the benefits of spending time in the evening in Greenwich. Of course, as this was the original issue, there's a high volume of visitors leaving Greenwich town centre at 5 p.m. with the closure of the museums and the markets, and that was a central thing that we wanted to correct for with the strategy. And that means there's an untapped potential in evening hospitality as well with that mass exodus. We found that only 7% of residents visit the town centre in the evening, but that was in 2021, so it could be affected by the pandemic, but still hugely low number. And 60% were in favor of extending museum hours, and museums have started to respond to that and think about what local programming in the evening looks like. Before the pandemic, culture and leisure uses were growing at night, which was a positive sign. And then day or night, visiting parks were an important driver for people to visit the town centre. And that's something that we think about in how the strategy gets played out in the spaces. Just to dive a little bit deeper on the Transport for London data, here you can see on the left entries and exits to Cuddy Sark DLR for Greenwich. That means people departing the town centre and people arriving into the town centre. You can see that there's a really steep curve, especially with departures after about 5 o'clock, as we mentioned, with the closure of many facilities in the town centre. You can see spikes in the commuters going in and out around 8 a.m., around 6 p.m. But that steep drop-off is really pronounced, especially when you compare it to a place nearby like Deptford. You still get the commuter spikes, but overall, the curve is not quite so steep. It's a little bit more flattened. It's a little bit more sustained. People are making more gradual entries and exits, and it's not that mass volume coming in and out. And it really highlights the underused capacity in the town centre and the reasons to pivot towards more local visitors. You can see it here on Saturday without those commuters going in and out, and you can see the difference. Again, that curve for Deptford is just a little bit more gentle, let's say. And of course, in Greenwich, you still have that massively high influx during the day. So that's just one bit of data that we found quite interesting.
Yeah, that's incredible insight, Mary Helena. It's like quite stark when you look at it in that way. You know, we might be able to guess trends, but when you see the data laid out like that, it obviously shows, you know, a number of hours that present huge possibility for additional economic growth and impact in a positive way for the borough. Wow. Okay. Right. Let's see how Camden compares. We'll head over to Camden now and ask the same question. What's been useful, challenging? What came as a surprise in the evidence base?
Thanks. So I've got no slides and you're not going to get any astonishing insights from me on this. As Victoria kind of set out, because we've been doing a very large pre-engagement exercise and then into citizen assembly, you know, our focus has really been on qualitative data capture. So the exercise that Victoria kind of lined out, and I think the challenge with that is really linked to our ability to have workshops with everybody. You know, there's always somebody we've missed. There are also interesting demographics at play in who is more adept or more interested in contributing to online surveys, for example. So we found that an interesting but also challenging thing is how respondents, the demographics of respondents is skewed from the demographics of the borough. So there's some work to do to rebalance that, and that's something we will play out over the assembly. But the use of doing the qualitative data capture is because the assembly process, really, we wanted to go in knowing what stakeholder priorities, likes and dislikes were, so we can shape the discussion for them and introduce sparingly and at a very headline level quantitative data. So we literally put together a placemat, which Matthew, who's on the call, very generously helps with, to put headline contextual information to aid discussion. It's literally in front of them. It's on the table on an A3 sheet, and then through the course of the first week, obviously people have kind of responded to that with interest. Some people are surprised by it. Some people don't believe what they're seeing, and given us pointers that we can then follow up. So qualitative data leads the process. Quantitative data is getting introduced off the back of that to help inform that discussion, and then we'll lean into quantitative data, more heavily as we kind of unpack the actions, and we need to develop more robust things. But that's the challenge to come. My colleagues from licensing are on this call as well, so worth mentioning that they're doing a licensing policy review at the same time as this, and we're informing each other, but we don't want this evening and nighttime strategy to become a rehash of that licensing policy discussion. But nonetheless, the work they're doing and the data and insight has been really useful and we'll unpack that more around licensing, numbers, approvals, noise data, that sort of thing. So it all comes into play to inform the process.
That's great, Patrick. Thank you. Wondering whether you felt like at the first Citizens Assembly on Saturday, some people went in with certain mindset and came out with perhaps some changed views, whatever way they might be going.
Yeah, I don't know about changed views. There's a kind of crime as an example. Our indicators show that overall crime is down. People don't believe that, and there's still in the feedback and all the comments, crime. What's Camden doing about crime? Perceptions of crime, and there's a question: in, are you responding to the data, which is saying crime is not the problem it was, or are you responding to the perceptions of crime to say actually it's valid to address people's how they experience, and experience is not led by data. So yeah, so things like that kind of come up in the assembly process.
Interesting, great. And now let's head back to the center of town and to Holba to talk us through what's been useful, what's been challenging, and any surprises that has come up in your research.
Yes, I'm just going to show a couple of drawings. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. So I thought I'd start just with, this is some of our land use mapping, and something that I want to say is that we also, prior to doing this piece of work, we worked on the public realm strategy for Holba for the daytime. So we have seen this area from both sides, and that's been very interesting for us. And so the principles, obviously they're completely different in lots of ways, but also allowed us to take things through from that understanding of it through the day into the evening and at night. So this is a land use map of how the whole area that we were looking at works in the daytime. So red is the retail. You can see the big spine of Piccadilly in the center of this drawing. Blue is commercial office, and green is the nighttime. So as we go through later, this is typical daytime. This is 6 to 9 p.m. and you see everything on Piccadilly drops off, and you start to see the emergence of the west of the area. So even though it's quite big, actually it's split between, as you move towards Mayfair and Berkeley Square, and then up towards Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus, and up to Soho. So this becomes more pronounced as we go on. So this is 9 till 11, and you can see where everything around the casinos, theatres, restaurants and bars is. And then the much later, so 11 till 6, there's still some things there. So this helped us to understand the pattern of how things are moving across the area, where the focus might be, and eventually a focus in a smaller area on trialing a 24-hour in a much smaller area. So I'm going to stop sharing screen because I think the rest is there's lots of detail there. In terms of the challenges and for the evidence base, one of them was really making sure that we could reach and speak to night workers themselves. Quite hard to reach group, and it involved being out with clipboards and meeting people. Online surveys did not work. People did not want to fill it in. We had daytime worker surveys and nighttime worker surveys. There was quite a big difference in their perceptions, with safety being more of an issue for nighttime workers, more typically going to be taking night buses home. More dissatisfaction with transport network, whereas daytime workers said transport's brilliant, that helps us to come out in the area, we want to stay here. Although of course one of the other things that we were picking up in the daytime surveys was people slowly returning back to work during the time that we were looking at this. Those patterns are still emerging, and we also had, it was a very atypical time for us because we're in an area which has a lot of international visitors, which has a lot of people, national visitors, and those things all dropped off and have then been coming back in different ways. And theatre, we've worked a lot with Society of London Theatres, actually, that's bounced back and is up, but more at weekends. So over the period of this data gathering, a lot has changed. It's changed in London and specifically here. Residents, it's tricky we have lots of residents in the area, but in areas around, actually, nighttime, as you all know, it can be quite political. And so how we engage with the residents can also be political. And we want to get across from the earliest stage, as we all agree on this call, nighttime strategy does not mean nightlife strategy only. It's not a licensing strategy, which is what everyone wants to jump into, but it doesn't mean that. We've got all these workers, we have a whole city to operate, all this transport, there's 30 night bus routes going through Piccadilly Circus and around, and it's getting that across and building that trust is probably one of the most interesting aspects of what we were doing there in terms of building that. And still, I think it's still to this point, there's some louder voices than others, and they have their own conversations with local authority. We're not doing this on behalf of local authority, so that's been an interesting challenge, I would say.
Welcome to my life. All of that is hugely interesting. I mean, we've had a few comments already about, the night worker aspect, and they're an incredibly difficult group to reach, as you've pointed out. We do struggle with this, and we've got 1.4 million night workers in London. It's gone down slightly from 1.6 before the pandemic. But what's interesting is that this really mirrors the number of people that have left the jobs market, really. So we're kind of like still, it's still sort of the numbers make sense, if you see what I mean. And we're finding people's work patterns really changing. Like you say, it's still a moving picture. So anyway, we want to open this up. I could go on about this for ages, but I'm much more interested in hearing what everyone on the call has to say. So do we have any questions that we can kick off with? Any questions for our three boroughs around gathering an evidence base in Greenwich, Camden, Holborn, or more generally? You can raise your hand, and you can put something in the chat. And I am poised to welcome anyone into the conversation. Judy.
Hi, sorry, I know we're trying to widen the conversation, but it's just to add in that we're, I think, one signature away from subscribing to the High Streets data service run by the GLA. Our cost of living survey with business last year and our previous business survey all pointed to the one lever that businesses wanted us to pull was to do anything we can to increase footfall, given the really difficult position that businesses are in, both at night and day. So we're doing the High Streets data service. We also, through our sub-regional partnership, we have access to MC Lightcast, which helps us look at specific sectors. So we can look at the visitor, we can pull out bits about that are more pertinent to the nighttime economy, and that's very useful. And if anybody just wants to talk about that in a more geeky way offline, obviously just email me.
Yeah, that's really great, Judy, and it's very pertinent. So I'm just going to bring in Paul from my team to just speak just for a minute, Paul, about what the High Street Data Service does, what it offers, and how it underpins forming the evidence base for your nighttime strategy.
Thanks, Amy. So the High Street Data Service, we trialled it. It's been going for over a year now, and it's proven quite useful, I think, for a number of boroughs to be able to get their hands on footfall data, which is broken down by hour, and spend data, which currently is only broken down by day. But using all of the subscriptions from the boroughs, we're able to collectively purchase this data, which means we get a much better deal than if it was individual boroughs or business improvement districts buying it on their own. And we've seen some of the quotes that boroughs have had and business districts have had, and it's quite a big difference. So this collective purchasing has enabled us to go out now and get spend data from MasterCard that's broken down into times of day. So from March onwards, you'll be able to see hopefully some much more useful data for nighttime strategies in particular, because we'll not only have the footfall broken down by time of day, but also that spend data broken down by time of day. And for the nighttime enterprise zones as well, we've also been purchasing opening hours data from the local data company. And that's something that we can talk about if other boroughs are more interested in that data. We can always talk about doing a sort of additional, adding more boroughs into that and doing another group purchase on that as well. And thank you to Matthew, who's on the call, for helping us with all of this as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Paul. And yeah, I'll second that. Thank you to Matthew, who's been working really hard on that. So Josh, I can see your hand is up. Josh from the British Beer and Pub Association.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. It's just it probably it may follow on from what Paul was just talking about there. That insight from the Greenwich presentation about arrivals and departures was just really interesting, and I mean, some of it's obvious, but just when you see it that starkly in on the page is really I think could be potentially very useful certainly for individual pub owners, but also for multiple operators. And I just wondered whether there was any way of creating just a simple sort of data dashboard where business owners can consult that sort of data easily and simply, just because for those who are able, I mean, obviously your average pub owner is a bit pushed for time at the moment, but if they are kind of interested in trying to maximize it and taking advantage of some of that untapped potential for hospitality, that would possibly be an easy way of doing that.
So Paul from my team can sort of correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding with the High Street Data Services, this is the direction we're going in. So we've been trialing the High Street Data Service, and it's now kind of getting more aspects of data available to it. Like Paul said, we're now getting that breakdown by hour, integrating other data that we can get from TfL, et cetera, and crucially bringing in business improvement districts to this, because I think business improvement districts alongside local authorities have that direct relationship with their businesses, and I think that that is eventually the goal, would be to have a dashboard where they can access this kind of information more easily. But Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, and please add in anything I'm forgetting.
I mean, at the minute, the High Street Data Service is open to local authorities. We're going to be adding in business improvement districts, which is fantastic. We can't open that data up to everybody. That can't be publicly accessible data because the cost would be astronomical in terms of the license arrangements with the data providers, because they obviously want to sell that data to individual businesses, etc. So that isn't going to be able to happen. But there is publicly available data out there, right? And I don't know, Mary Helen, for example, some of the data that she was showing, I imagine, is taken from the sort of TfL data store, which some of that you can get through an API, or some of that you can sort of request from TfL, for example.
I think it was part of the nighttime observatory data set as well.
Okay, yeah.
It's just that you have to manipulate it, and it's not instantly visual, and so it does take time to work with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Matthew's on this call as well, who's providing our sort of expertise around data. And if he's got anything to chime in, I don't know whether he's still here. I'm sure he will do.
Matthew, I mean, I think Josh, you make a fantastic point, and I actually think that what the GLA are doing, it could create a total change in the relationship between the boroughs and with their stakeholders and businesses. So ultimately, I think the High Streets data provides an opportunity where, with the upskilling of the boroughs, if you create sort of participatory groups, whether it's licensing or whatever, every quarter or 6 months, that the borough can present and create an engagement around what the data's been saying, and you can exchange your experiences around your perception of safety and crime and sales, and you know, what you're going to do with your business is absolutely key to actually the success of the place. So the borough needs to know, are you going to extend hours, close, whatever it might be. So I do think there's a fantastic opportunity. It won't happen overnight, but I think we're starting to head in that direction, which is, I think, very good news for everybody.
Thanks so much, Matthew. I hope that's helpful, Josh. And we'll take do we have one more question from Councillor Seaton? If you'd like to come in. Oh, and then we have Adrian, and then we'll move on.
Yes, thank you. And this has been a very useful insight into what's happening across London. So thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much. Two questions that arose recently here in Southwark, and it's part of this community and business consultation. That's, of course, the compatibility from a nighttime economy in our local town centres, and because it's interesting the traffic data, but I'm interested in the crime and ASB data. None of you've shared that thus far, and I'm interested to understand in other parts of London how you cope with the change the mix of those in your town centres at night. And then my second question has to do with the cost. And I'm grateful for Matthew's intervention, because you're right, we need a separate consultation body, particularly in Southwark, which can provide an opportunity for those businesses who are operating at night primarily to interact with their neighbourhood. But my second question has to do with the cost. We're just very conscious that, of course, it's clearing up the additional cost of returning our public realm to a state suitable for the daytime economy, you know, which is where the bulk of the public resources should be spent. And I wonder if there's a conflict between the two. And I'll just put it to you, Amy.
Well, there's only a conflict if we create a conflict. And if we see the night as less than. Because we have to address the inequalities that we're experiencing at night, as nighttime workers do. We are planning for the day, and we're not planning as equally for the night. And if we center all of our conversations around crime and perceptions of crime, that disregards the other things that are happening at night. And so this is why having a holistic approach and an integrated approach, working with partnership, in a partnership mode, really helps expand our understanding of the night, what people are doing at night, why they're doing it, and changing people's perceptions about, you know, some people might perceive everything that happens at night is bad and wrong, and that's not the case. Our economy functions 24/7, and we have to plan for the nighttime. And I think, you know, personally, daytime has had quite a big share of planning and attention, and it's about time that we turn the tables and look at nighttime as a time of great opportunity for our city. And this is why all of the work that is going on here that we've heard about today is so crucial and so important to our city thriving around the clock, recovering socially and economically from what we've been experiencing these past years. So I'll leave that there. I know Camden touched very briefly on crime stats, and I just wondered, Patrick, if you could come in and just speak for a minute or so on that, because we do have to move on shortly. But Patrick, you mentioned this that your crime stats in Camden were showing a downward trend, but yet the perception of people was that it was going up.
Yeah, it's pretty much that. I mean, there's not a lot more nuance to it because we only presented a high-level borough incident report. We didn't go into individual town centres or into particular types of crime linked to the evening and nighttime economy. which we will do as we kind
Yeah.
of go along. Yeah, but you
Okay,
know,
maybe
nothing
we
more
can
than that.
share that more widely
Yeah.
in a future meeting or something.
Yeah.
Right. And the cost of the data. So Paul from my team, and maybe Matthew, I can't remember off the top of my head how much it costs to join the High Street Data Service, but to the point, Councillor Seaton, about sort of collective purchasing gives us more power as the GLA and also as local authorities, because obviously if you're a data company, you're interested in earning as rinsing everybody for as much money as possible for as little data as they have to part with. I mean, call me cynical, but that is their business model. And so rather than picking off 33 local authorities individually and signing you each up for the same type of data at say 25 grand a pop, what would happen if the GLA had a subscription service? We purchase the data and we share it for a much smaller subscription fee, and you get a wider selection of data. So that is the idea behind the High Street Data Service. Matthew, do you remember how much it costs off the top of your head?
Yeah, so it's £20,000 to the High Street Data Service, but I think that what it's providing is more than that. So I'd say to Councillor Seaton, one of the things that that Paul and the GLA team are trying to create is cross-borough data workshops. So there's a lot of value that can be created by people coming together, and ultimately the aspiration would be that if we can answer 80 or 90% of common questions that every borough has on a quarterly or monthly basis by acquiring the data collectively and also enabling you to analyse it, as well as upskilling the staff within the boroughs and creating these engagements that we talked about earlier, with publicans or whatever, then that would be a major win, because unfortunately there is a lot of data. It's quite misleading, and footfall is an absolute classic of that. And ultimately you've got to have enough evidence to get the confidence, back to Patrick's point, with the public, that you actually know what you're talking about, because otherwise they just say, well, it's rubbish, I haven't got any sales, your sales data says it's gone up. Or you look at credit card data and you're in a part of London where they just transact with cash. So you need to be quite cynical about it and understand the context. And I think that is what the GLA is trying to build, and the High Streets Data Service and these cross-borough data workshops are all part of that. But it's a journey, and we really need all the boroughs bought into that journey, as well as stakeholders.
Yeah, we've got another cross-borough data workshop coming up, don't we, Matthew?
Yeah,
Maybe
next week, 2nd of March.
Yeah, so maybe we can just, if you don't mind, putting a link or something, how people can sign up in the chat. If you're interested, it would be great to have you with us, Councillor Seaton, and anybody else who would like to participate. Right. I realize we only have 20 minutes and we've got there's so much to talk about. So I'm going to go to Adrian quickly and then to Anna.
Thanks, Amy. It was just a quick one, really. We're looking in Hammersmith and Fulham to develop a strategy, but we want it to focus on 3 distinct town centres. And I just wasn't sure what the boroughs that have spoken already, what they thought the challenges would be of that. Just to give you a bit of background, we've got some quite vocal residents who aren't really keen on the development of the nighttime economy. So we obviously have to be sensitive to them as well. And we've got some quite sort of densely residential areas in Hammersmith and Fulham, but then these sort of thriving town centres, that are really in parallel to those areas as well. So yeah, just any advice or guidance from the boroughs that have already spoken would be gratefully appreciated.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's 3 separate town centres that I think Camden have been focusing on. Victoria, I don't know if you want to come in and talk about that, but I'd also just say quickly, Adrian, that part of it is kind of how you frame it, and people's fears, which some can be valid, others are just imagined, like what might happen. But framing it as planning better rather than developing, because then people think, oh my gosh, there's going to be a nightclub on every corner. Actually, what we're doing is planning for the night better, so their experience hopefully will be better as a resident, because you've thought about it and you've planned for it. Victoria, do you want to come in and just talk about the 3 town centres that you've been working on briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think when we went to Camden Town, Seven Dials, and Kilburn before our assembly, we picked those as a kind of, a representative mix of Camden's sort of places, knowing that we couldn't go everywhere. So, and in explaining that to our assembly members, that I think that landed okay with people, and they understood that we couldn't go to every high street. But I think, sort of maybe to answer your question in a slightly different way, I think the that relationship and relational kind of element to all of this is so fundamental, and I feel like that's one of, if not one of the biggest pieces that we are trying to build with this whole approach, and being led by the kind of qualitative and the lived experience as the sort of starting point for our strategy, because it is so torturous in some ways, and really people are really upset about certain things. But that said, we know that there are some people are better at getting the attention of councillors or council officers, and that's also on us as council officers to know how that works, and to know those dynamics, so that we can account for that in how we do other engagement. And others on the call talked about their different ways of going out into their communities as well. So yeah, I keep coming back to relationships as being sort of one of the fundamental things I think that we're trying to do here, and build on, and dare I say, try and make it better than what it is in some cases, particularly where you've got those tensions with those traditional kind of tensions with licensees and residents who feel hard done by, but equally businesses that feel very hard done by the system and processes. So yeah, anyway, those are my kind of brief thoughts, but I don't know how helpful they are.
Yeah,
but that's kind of what we've observed so far. Yeah.
Adrian, if it would be helpful, Satu and Daniel could connect you with Victoria and her team. Maybe if you're, obviously each local authority is different, every area is different, but in some respects, sometimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So there's great stuff that you can take from Camden. Well, we can pair you up, and you can take that ahead over a cup of tea sometime.
That would be really helpful. Yeah, I think Camden's approach would be most similar to Hammersmith Fulham, definitely. So yeah. Definitely. Thanks very much.
Great. Right. So I am aware that we have exactly 16 minutes left to do 2 questions. So I'm gonna merge these 2 together, because it's broadly about developing a vision statement and then an action plan. So nobody wants a strategy that just sits on the shelf and looks like a lovely document. We actually have to take action. Yeah, and this is the goal and the aim of what we're doing. So I'm wondering if each local authority can just briefly talk, because I reckon we're going to have a lot of questions about this, about getting to the vision statement and then the action plan, and resources and measuring, I think, are the kind of 2 big themes that have come out of today. So we'll go to Greenwich first.
Thanks very much, Amy. So I won't do obviously everything I was going to say. I just wanted to pull out the discussion of crime and antisocial behavior. We did have a little bit of a journey going from thinking about needing night wardens to having night hosts, which is just a more proactive, welcoming kind of role to have, which creates that atmosphere saying this is a place for you to be at night, rather than this is a place where you can't screw up and cause problems. So yeah, we thought that was quite useful. But just jumping on to the vision and the objectives, I want to say in developing the vision and the strategy in general that motivating and advocating with landowners and stakeholders was really one of the more transformational things that we did. And there was a lot of mediation. Someone was asking about between groups and residents and thinking about what all this actually means. And I think, yeah, it's about pushing on doors that are slightly ajar often, because this is an area that hasn't been well coordinated historically. So there's people who are willing to collaborate. And I just want to read a bit of the vision. So this strategy is built on a foundation of cultural and business partners and their shared interest in creating a shift in the nighttime experience of Greenwich Town Centre. Much of Greenwich Town Centre is dedicated to the experience of heritage, the built environment, maritime heritage, the heritage of markets and commerce. But Greenwich adds to that heritage every day through markets, makers displayed at Made in Greenwich, the hard work of University of Greenwich students and staff, and through business and residents who give the place its unique personality and character. And this is what should be celebrated. So that's just a bit about the vision, and I'll hand over now to Sue Whiting from Visit Greenwich.
Hi, thank you, Mary Helen. Hi, everyone. I've been sitting here very quietly listening to everything. I'm realising in my old age I'm turning into a geek for data. That was fascinating, the earlier section. Very useful. Yeah, I'm head of marketing development at Visit Greenwich. I've been involved with working with Royal Borough of Greenwich and Mary Helen and 4th Street, primarily personally through the High Streets for All and being engaged in that. Our perspective being Visit Greenwich and the destination management organisation for the Royal Borough of Greenwich is that we've learned over the last couple of years, when our international tourists disappeared, that we love our locals and we don't want to lose them, and it's how to get them to engage in the World Heritage Site and Greenwich Town Centre more, so that when we do recover and we get the international tourists back, we still keep that local loyal audience coming back and returning with families and friends. So it's a really valuable kind of process which is why we're engaging with the Royal Borough of Greenwich. This slide is just to show some of the events. We've been testing what works or what works best in terms of trying to get people to stay beyond the 5 o'clock. So when museums close, when shops close, what would encourage people to stay later and stay longer. Although we've got a very strong food and drink offering in Greenwich Town Centre, there's other things that we can do. So the High Streets for All project, for example, has been able to fund test events like pop-up markets, funding reopening a market in a vacant space, and lighting events as well. So being in the autumn, it's allowed us to kind of lengthen the visitor season as well. So we've being able to put things on at night time and make the most of that kind of darker nature to running events and markets. Lost my flow now. Yeah, so we had 2 spectacular events which just helped drive people stay late, and pop-up markets and things. But they were around the kind of the Diwali time and Lunar New Year just gone as well. So yeah, so that was kind of like the kind of test events that we've been doing. And then on the data side of things, we were running visitor surveys for those couple of kind of spectacular light display events to actually see who was engaging in those events.
That's really helpful. That's great. Was there anything else?
I think I've got one more slide after that. Yes. Okay. So from the marketing perspective, I was talking about the value of our visitors. For Visit Greenwich and for the Royal Borough and its partners, we've included objectives of the evening economy into our latest destination campaign as well. So it kind of drives through in things that we're doing as well for the visitors as well as for the locals. So as anyone working in tourism knows, a key objective is to extend the visitor season from peak summer into the autumn and winter. It's to get people to stay longer, later, spend more. So this is ticking all the boxes for us. And so just gone, we ran an autumn winter campaign. We didn't do a summer campaign. We specifically did an autumn winter campaign, how to make the most of Greenwich, the best is in the autumn and winter. And there was a tier to that of Greenwich Late. So what is going on in the evening to encourage people to enjoy, special menus or stay for the markets, go to these light up events and things. So that Greenwich Late has worked very well. We're just doing the evaluation now, so I've got no massive figures to tell you at the moment, but it was I do know that when we had a midterm campaign report come through, that it was already surpassing what we'd done the previous summer in terms of effectiveness of people just being aware and engaging in the campaign. And I think it was because it was slightly odd that we were doing an off-peak campaign and not a peak summer one, so it was really grabbing attention. So and the target market, as I was saying, was it's the local residents. So working very strongly with the PR and comms team at the council to carry on promoting Greenwich Town Centre to the local residents, and then also widening it out to kind of like a 90-minute travel time of London and South East England visitor markets.
It looks fantastic, Sue. Really love the images. Very inspiring. So Judy is also gonna put some info in the chat about the action plan rather than speak, because we're a bit short for time. So please do check your chat. And you know, a lot of what you've shown already is shown great action. So really excited to hear more about that. I'm going to turn now to Camden to speak briefly about your vision statement and your action plan, but I presume you're not there yet because you're
Yeah, so
you're still in the
it's going to be super
consultation
brief.
phase.
Yeah, so we haven't, this session coming on Saturday, we'll be starting to shape the vision with the Assembly members, but we did start out with a framework for vision, 4 key themes around inclusivity, safety, diversity, and celebrating what's iconic about Camden, and some framing lenses to help that discussions, you know, supporting what's there, well-being of workers, partnerships with other stakeholders, and cost of living, for example. And this was tested through pre-engagement. So talk to us in another week and we'll have a better answer for you on that one. I think the feedback with the drafting of the vision so far has been there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't really speak of Camden's uniqueness or represent a balance in views and needs. So that's something we'll look to see come out this weekend.
So that's interesting. So you have the framework, and then through the assemblies, you kind of put flesh on the bones and make it all about Camden and totally relevant.
Yeah, it's a bit kind of AI created at the moment as it looks. It doesn't really have much humanity to it. So similarly with our action plan, we will have an action plan shaped after these assemblies, so we're still on that journey. But I think the opportunity will be really to see where, in terms of resourcing an action plan going forward and how it's measured, is the opportunities for cross policy and cross borough working, and partnership, delivery and partnership. We talked a lot about distributed leadership and ownership of actions as something we want to achieve. So those are things we'll be working towards.
Fantastic. Really looking forward to hearing more. And we will now move on to Holba, if that's okay. And I've just got somebody at my door. So Holba, carry on while I just get the buzzer.
Yep. No worries. I am sharing. Am I sharing screen? Yes. Okay. So I've already shown earlier quite a lot about the process that we went through and what the objectives look like. So I'm just going to show a couple of different things now, and we can go back to those if any questions. So the first is this diagram, which is showing the view of the nighttime economy in this area, but in London more generally, not as this binary daytime, nighttime economy situation, you know, the going out and then the daytime. That's not how it works anywhere, and definitely not in this area. We have a hugely vital daytime office economy in this part of the West End, as many of you will know, but actually it's all these shades in between, the overlap of people coming in and going home at the same time, staying in for a bit after work, going out, then a huge surge of people coming in to go to theatres and Theatreland and other things at 7:30, then after that, the post-theatre economy and the late night economy. So it's actually a very complex, we're trying to find a diagram to describe how we then move that into a strategy that explains this full kind of range of shades of things that happen over the nighttime. It's not just one simple thing in this area. So that's one of our challenges. The other then, when we're getting to strategic objectives for an area like this, is we need to find actions that allow us to have quite a wide range of things in our action plan, which are really quite diverse and quite different in scale, from saying we need to lobby for this area, this space to be the nighttime equivalent of, say, Regent and Oxford Street for retail. This is what this is for nighttime. So on the one hand, we have this big, huge gross value added argument about the importance of this to London and the UK economy. But then we have a granular point of certain streets need work and need the kind of work that you would do in the daytime for a public realm strategy at night. And what would that look like? To very fine points on data analysis and using new data to support better and smarter and more nuanced licensing conversations. And finally, policies around safe night out. So that's why we've arranged it around 5 strategic objectives, which then flow into all of these actions, is because of the scale and the task and all these different things that we have. It's so multi-layered. There's 57 now of actions. There could be more. I mean, it says at the beginning, this is not the be all and end all. It's really there to galvanize and give energy to lots of people wanting to do things. The bid, of course, but local authority, residents, businesses, everyone coming together. So this is kind of a leaping off point. And then what happens with the action plan is it allows us to have that accountability, go back, see how we're doing, see what's missing, see what's worked. But having it set out in that way, and I'm going to go like flick through to the page of what it looked like, sorry. You'll see that, well, two things. Holborough are going to arrange it via a board and then working groups underneath, delivering each of those things. But you'll see that we set it out with things that are underway, short, medium and long term. So all of them can be started, but long term means there's some complexity or lots of stakeholders. But the idea is to get on with as many as possible, as quickly as possible.
Mm. Wow, you've got your work cut out for you. That is really impressive, and as you say, really complicated as well. You know, unpicking every single aspect of it, but the value will be seen in the long term. And I think that that's part of the kind of bringing everybody along with you, right? And making sure that everybody feels valued at the beginning and that they're invested in the project in the long term. Now, I'm sure we've got loads of questions, and we've got a couple of minutes left. Anybody want to jump in with questions for any of the boroughs or comments about anything at all? Jay.
Thank you. I'm sorry for joining a little late to this. I just wanted to pick up on some of the points that were made in the last presentation about sort of the time frame. And it's more a comment, I'm afraid. So sorry, everyone. To me, at least, it feels like the conversation is about a wider social economy rather than specifically sort of a specific focus on the nighttime economy. I'm just wondering sort of what your thoughts are on that. Do we need to look at this in a much more holistic sort of all-day approach, with a specific focus, yes, on sort of 6 o'clock afterwards, because there are unique challenges, but it's one part of that much wider conversation almost.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, Jake, and I can, when we often say nighttime economy, people automatically think of bars, pubs, and clubs, yeah, and that kind of social economy, as you say. But what we're encouraging local authorities to think about in a holistic way is the economy at night, okay? Because when we don't talk about economy during the day, we just talk about the economy. So you're right in that our ultimate goal is to kind of get this holistic approach so we're thinking about things in a 24-hour way. But if we only are dealing with that traditional, what we think of as nighttime economy, licensed establishments, then we're really missing a trick, because we have 1.4 million people who are regularly working at night. Most of those people are actually working in health and social care. And so if we're, that's going back to the importance of getting night workers' voices in here, they're the ones that are providing services so that the rest of us can live our lives during the day. So there's a lot of different phrases and framings that are used, and there's not much consistency, which can make it even more confusing. But just to kind of say that we're taking a holistic approach, we're not judging if people use phrases in different ways, but our approach is a holistic one and looking at our economy at night as part of a 24-hour economy. So I don't know if that helps or makes it even more confusing than when you ask the question. But I'm gonna, okay. Anna, do you want to come in here? You're on mute, Anna.
Sorry, I think after 3 years I'd be fine with that. But anyway, so it's definitely what we found in this area is that point that it is a whole functioning ecosystem, day into night. And so on the one hand, we've got lots of cultural activity, and it's hard. And coming back to the economy point earlier, it's hard to overstate how much that then drives the wider ecosystem. So for there's more people go to see a West End theatre show than see live football in a year. There's so much, and then what comes with that is so much additional economic activity and footfall, and same with live music, same with lots of things that happen in the evening too. But the other point about it not just being that nighttime economy that Amy said is that we had really interesting conversations with, say, Boots at Piccadilly and McDonald's, and they want to stay open later. They're serving all these functions for night workers and for people coming into the area. They were really, really great stakeholders as part of this whole conversation. They were saying they would actually prefer to push their opening hours later. They're so busy, and so it's a really interesting point as we start to develop economy which isn't just run on the same kind of, if something shuts and other things start, that it is much more mixed. And that's why I wanted to show that nuanced diagram about the importance of that economy.
It's really helpful, Anna. And just Judy has posted a comment in the chat that I also think is helpful, is that around night work. And it's often badly paid and insecure. And they've got 40,000 night people that are working at night in the borough of Greenwich. And it's a big area of concern for them. And this should be mirrored in, that concern should be mirrored. We'd like to see it mirrored in other local authorities. It's a complicated picture, and they're a complicated bunch of people to reach, as we've seen. But it's that 1.4 million people that are keeping our economy moving while, 2/3 of us Londoners sleep. The other third are making things happen, and we can't forget them. There's a great issue of inequality there, and it's that inequality between day and night that we really need to address, and that I'm dedicated to, as London Tonight's are. So I think we've gone a couple minutes over time. Quite honestly, we could carry on this conversation for another hour and more, but we're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure everyone's got other things to get on with. But I really appreciate your time and all of the incredibly insightful presentations today. We're going to share the recording around. Please do share it with others that you think might benefit. And any questions going on from this, my team and I, we are always here for you. So if someone from my team could just put our emails in the chat, just in case you don't have them, we'd love to hear from you, whatever time of day or night, and we will aim to help when and where we can. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.